In section 8.6, we're going to learn how to factor quadratics that have a leading coefficient. So in 8.5, it just had an x squared. In 8.6, there's going to be a number in front of the x squared. So just like in 8.5, I'm going to motivate how we're going to come up with our answer by multiplying two linear binomials together. They are going to be mx plus p times nx plus q, where m, p, n, and q can be, but not necessarily, different numbers. So first, multiply m, n, x, x, so that's m, n, x squared. Outer, m, q, x. Inner, npx, and then my last term, p times q. What I want to do now is I want to compare where with the multiplied out form. So that would be ax squared plus bx plus c. And nothing in common here, nothing in common there. So let's look at what we have here. I need the last numbers to be whatever p times q are, okay? And I need the first number to be whatever m times n is. And what we're going to end up doing is we're going to find this middle number by splitting that thing up. Okay, again, this is just motivation. What you need to understand is I'm going to be able to take this middle term and split it up into two separate terms. And if I split it up into two separate terms, watch this. I can go back to section 8.4 homework and then put a plus sign here. And now I can do the section 8.4 homework by factoring out the greatest common factor of each set of parentheses. So what I want to do is I want to find the greatest common factor between mnx squared and mqx. Well, I have an m in common here and an x in common. So I'm going to divide each term by mx. So I'm going to write mx outside of a set of parentheses. The m's cancel. I have an n. X squared divided by x is x. Plus, the m's cancel. The x's cancel, and I have a q. Plus, what do I have in common between this set of terms? The only thing that's in common between these two set of terms is a p. So I pull the p out, and I do the division. The p's cancel, so I have nx. The p's cancel, so I have a plus q. And notice I have something times mx plus q plus another something times nx plus q. So I can take these two terms and pull them together times the thing they were multiplied by. And notice I get back to where I started from. So we're going to take something that is in the ax squared plus bx plus c form. We're going to split the middle term. We're going to factor out the greatest common factor of the first terms, the greatest common factor of the last terms, and we should end up with something times a factor plus something else times the same factor, and then we'll rewrite it as two binomials. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work through several examples here. I'm going to pause while I erase the board, then get the examples up. So for the examples, I'm going to do guided practice 2, guided practice 5, homework problem number 46. The only difference is I changed all of the variable names to x's. First thing I'm going to do is list the steps that we want to take, and then I'm going to work through each of the 3 examples. The second video for this section will show you an alternate method that you can use to do these to come up with the same answers. So step 1, we want to factor any greatest common factor from all terms. We want to get out anything that's in common before we even start with this mess. Step 2, if A is negative, factor out the negative. Next thing I want to do is we're going to do a setup process. So the way the setup works is we're going to copy the first term. We're going to split the second. And we're going to copy the last. And you're going to see this when I do the examples. Step 4. We're going to put parentheses around this now will have 4 terms. 1, 2, 3, 4. Parentheses around the first 2. Parentheses around the last 2. With a plus sign in between. And then step 5 is I want to find 2 numbers that multiply to A times C and that add to our B term. We are going to take those 2 numbers, put the 6 up here, and we're going to fill in the blanks. Seven, we're going to factor. And 8, solve if applicable. If there is not a common factor, or if the first sign is not negative, then I can skip step 1 and or step 2. So I have examples of skipping steps 1 and 2, skipping step 1, and then this one will be skipping step 2. So first example, guided practice 2, 4x squared minus 9x plus 5. There is nothing in common between 4, negative 9, and 5, so I skip step 1. 4 is positive, so I skip step 2. Step 3 is setup. I copy, I split, and then I'm going to copy. All right, 4x squared plus blank x plus blank x plus 5. Okay, then I put parentheses around the first 2 terms, parentheses around the last 2 terms, a plus sign in between the 2. Now what I want to do is I want to find 2 numbers that multiply to A times C, which is 20, that add to a negative 9. And from section 8.5, if 2 numbers multiply to a positive, they have to have the same sign. And if I add them together to get a negative, they both have to have negatives. So I'll go through my combinations that multiply to 20, which are 1 and 20. That would be a 20, doesn't work. 2 and 10. Negative 2 times negative 10 is 20, but that would be negative 12. And then 4 and 5. So I have negative 5 and negative 4. So I've done step 5. Step 6, I want to fill in the blanks. And when I fill in the blanks, I want to be smart. Notice I have a 4 and a 5 in both of these. So I want to put the 4 with the 4, and I want to put the negative 5 with the 5. So 4x squared minus 4x plus negative 5x plus 5. Now I'm going to factor. I want to find the greatest common factor of the first group, greatest common factor of the last group, and then I'm going to end up doing some combinations. So greatest common factor between 4 and negative 4 is 4. Greatest common factor between x and x squared is the lowest power of x, which is just x to the first. Greatest common factor of the last group between negative 5 and 5 is 5. However, if there's a negative sign out front here, you always pull the negative sign out with the number. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the 4x in front of this group. I am going to put the negative 5 in front of this group. And now I am going to do the division. 4 divided by 4 is 1. X squared divided by x is x. Negative 4 divided by 4 is negative 1. X divided by x is 1. Negative 5 divided by negative 5 is 1. And x over 1 is just x. 5 divided by negative 5 is negative 1. Notice you did something wrong if the two things in parentheses are not the same. Next thing I can do is I can write these two terms combined times the x minus 1. So my answer here would be 4x minus 5 times x minus 1. As you get comfortable with this step, once you write out this group, I have no problem with you going immediately to that step. Because this group, this first number is this number and this number combined. And when you do the division steps, you get the same answer here. So what I typically do is I do the division, write down my answer, and then I do the division again to make sure I got the same answer. And I'm going to do that on the next example. Next one is guided practice 5. Minus 5x squared plus 6x minus 1. Step 1, factor out any greatest common factor. No common factors between negative 5, 6, and negative 1. Step 2, if a is negative, factor out the negative. A term is negative, so I'm going to factor it out. So that means just change the sign of everything in here. So now I have negative times the quantity 5x squared minus 6x plus 1. I'm going to do step 3 and 4 together. That negative comes along for the ride the whole time. So I'm going to put a set of square brackets. Copy the first term, plus blank x, plus blank x. Copy the last term. Parentheses around the first two, parentheses around the last two, plus sign in between the two. My next step is to find two numbers that multiply to a times c, which is 5, that add to a negative 6. Same sign because I have a positive here, and then they add to a negative 6, so they both have to be negative. My options are 1 and 5, so negative 1 and negative 5, which would be negative 6. Negative 2 and negative 3, which would be negative 5. So it's going to be the negative 1 and the negative 5. Again, I want to be smart when I fill in the blanks for step 6. So to fill in the blanks, I'm going to put the 5 with the 5 and then the 1 with the 1. So again, keep the negative along for the ride. I've got a double set of parentheses here, so I'm using square brackets. So 5x squared minus 5x plus negative 1x plus 1. Okay, I'm now going to show you the shortcut method, skipping from this step to this step. The negative comes along for the ride. What I want to do is find the greatest common factor of the first two terms. The greatest common factor between 5 and negative 5 is 5. Lowest power of x is the first power. Greatest common factor of the last terms is the greatest common factor between -1 and 1, which is 1. But if the sign in front of the first term is negative, you want to pull out the negative sign. So notice here where I just put a single division bar. That is the same thing as me doing these double division bars over here. But this gives me my first term. So I've got my negative that I carried along from the ride. And it gives me 5x minus 1. And then the second term I get by doing division. 5x squared divided by 5x. 5 divided by 5 is 1. X squared divided by x is x. Negative 5 divided by 5 is -1. X divided by x is 1. Check my work. -1x divided by -1 is in fact a positive x. And 1 divided by -1 is in fact a -1. And I am done. So notice the step I skipped was writing 5x times x minus 1 and -1 times x minus 1 in this step. Because this step always happens like this, I have no problem with you skipping this step. However, if you need to, go ahead and write this step out. The last example also has a step 8 because it says to solve. So once I get done factoring homework problem 46, I'm going to set each of my factors equal to 0 and solve to find out where the x-intercepts are, the solutions, the roots of the equation. So because I ran out of room over here, I'm going to erase a little bit. And then I'm going to walk through the steps. And again, the second video for this section is doing a different method to get the same answer. Some people like the second method, but I recommend using the first method because it will work as we get into the next chapter also. So step 1, factor out any greatest common factor from all terms. Number that goes into 8, -6, and -14 is 2. So I'm going to divide everything here by 2 and pull it out. 8 divided by 2 is 4, so I have 4x squared. -6x divided by 2 is -3x. And -14 divided by 2 is -7. Step 2, if the a term is negative, pull out the negative. A term is positive here, so I'm okay. Step 3 and 4 is setup. Notice because I have something coming along for the ride, I'm going to use square brackets in my setup. Copy the first term. Plus blank x. Plus blank x. That's splitting the second term. Copy the last term. Parentheses around the first two terms. Parentheses around the last two terms. Plus sign in between the two. Find two numbers that multiply to 4 times -7, which is -28, that add to -3. They have to have opposite signs. The largest magnitude is negative. So factors of 28, I'm going to do -28 and 1, which would give me a -27. -14 and 2, which would give me a -12. -7 and a +4, which would give me the -3. Again, this work is not required. I knew that it was -7 and 4. I wanted to show you how to think about it. Now again, smart. I'm going to put the -7 with the -7 and the 4 with the 4. I have no problem with you sticking them directly up here, but because I'm writing on the board, I am going to write them out separately. So I have 4x squared plus 4x plus -7x minus 7. And again, this is all equals 0 because we're going to solve at the end. The 2 comes along for the ride. And I'm going to end up with 2 linear factors. So, greatest common factor between 4x squared and 4x is 4x. Greatest common factor between -7x and -7 is -7. So I'm going to write 4x minus 7. Then I'm going to do the division. 4x squared divided by 4x is x. 4x divided by 4x is 1. Check my work. Negative 7x divided by negative 7 is x. Negative 7 divided by negative 7 is positive 1. Now, because this is a solve problem, I'm going to set each factor equal to 0. So I'm going to find out when 2 is equal to 0. I'm going to find out when 4x minus 7 is equal to 0, and when x plus 1 is equal to 0. 2 is equal to 0 never. Okay? Two-step problem. Add the 7 divided by 4. At this point, I do not need you to show the work. You can just directly tell me x equals 7/4. However, if you need to show the work, add the 7 and then divide by 4. This is a one-step equation. And I get x equals -1. So again, you should be to the point where you can directly look at this equation and give me the answer. If you still think you need to work through the work, go ahead and work through the work. Okay, what I'm going to have you guys do for the video problems on this one are guided practice number 4. And then I am going to have you do homework problem number 24. So the next video is optional. However, most students find it the easiest way to do the factoring on these problems. So video 8.6b, I'm going to show you another method to factor. Again, it's optional, but most students find it the easiest method to do it. This is the method that you have to learn because basically what we're doing is we're grouping things, and in the next chapter, you have to be able to factor by grouping. So I'm going to stop this lesson here and then do the other method for you.